everyone, and welcome to the Stop Shitting All Over Yourself podcast. I'm actually recording this intro with Saira here. I usually do it without the guest there, but Saira's my sister, so whatever. We're gonna just do this on the fly. Now, this podcast is gonna be a little different. I think it's gonna be more like you of having a fly on the wall to a conversation that Saira and I were started to have a few days ago, maybe about a week ago. And she thought it was like really important for us to like share. And it's one of my favorite conversations because I think it is like game changing. So it's all about guilt. Okay. So we're going to talk all about guilt today. And we're going to talk about guilt as the price for doing something. So yep. Saira, I want let's start with like sort of the question of like while we were talking, we're like, I can't remember how it came up, but there was a moment where you were talking about feeling guilty or feeling bad about something. And you said, I remember what you told me, that guilt is not the price that you pay for doing something. I can't even remember what I said or how I said it, but can you remind me a little bit about where this came from? Like, where did this, thank you. I am quite brilliant. Can't help myself. Yeah. Tell me, where did this come from?
Honestly, this is so part of like my identity that I think it goes back to, I remember going through this as far back as when I would go shopping with Fada way back when I was in college, and, back then this was, you got to remember like, the late 90s, where it's not like there was like very, cell phones were still new. The internet was still pretty new. So really the only way you occupied yourself was you either went to a bar or a nightclub and went dancing and whatnot, or you went shopping, right? We were like mall rats, I guess. And
it's the end of the mall rat era.
Exactly. So we would go to the mall and we would go shopping and I'd buy clothes or whatever. And every single time I would just be racked with guilt, right? Anytime I would buy anything, if I bought jeans, jewelry, food, whatever, I would feel guilty. And it was almost like this cycle, right? This habitual behavior routine that I would go through. It would be like, oh, I'd earn money. I'd work 3 jobs, I'd have, save up, whatever. I'd go buy the thing I'd been looking at, whether it was like an iPod or, jeans, whatever. I'd go, I'd agonize, I would spreadsheet, I would like think. Then I'd finally be like, okay, I'm going to buy it. Then I would have buyer's remorse. Then I'd be like, oh my God, I shouldn't have done that. Like, what if I have no house and I can't pay my rent and I get, evicted and then I'm homeless, right? Like you go through this whole like, and
classics this is our classic cycle.
Yeah, classic. And then I would just get, again, I'd be racked with guilt. And then eventually I would get over it. And so this came up, I think, in context of travel, because one of the things post-COVID world, that I really realized in not being able to travel during the, COVID lockdowns was that I really, really value travel. Like I hate flying, but I love traveling and I love adventuring and seeing and experiencing new things, but that costs money. Right. And so I went through this whole thing where I was starting to feel guilty about taking trips. And that's kind of how you and I got on this topic of like, why, like, if you've made the decision that, this is something that you value in your life, it's something that's important to you, it's something that fulfills you and brings you joy. Why are you tarnishing that experience? Why are you taking away your opportunity to fully enjoy it by attaching this currency of guilt to it as if it's part of the transaction, right?
Yeah. You said that really well, dude.
As if the trip can't happen unless there's that associated turmoil that you put yourself through that, well, should I go? So I think I've noticed this in a lot of folks that a lot of things that they consider, I don't want to say, I'm going to use the word indulgence. Okay. That anytime people in my circle, a lot of them, I've experienced this with them, when they engage in a behavior or make a decision that seems to them as indulgent, there's this guilt that comes along with it. I'll give you an example. I have a friend who really wants to hire a housekeeper, right? She really, really wants to have someone come into her house and clean it up for her. And and really the fact that our house, that she can't maintain it, it causes a lot of stress for her, right? It's a trigger for her. It makes her anxious. It depresses her, but she's busy. She works, she has kids, she's got a spouse to take care. Like she's a lot of things going on. She doesn't necessarily have time to always clean her house. And I'm like, then hire somebody to do that for you. You're helping that person make a living. That's a good thing, right? You're putting money back into the economy. That's a good thing. This is their job, right? They've chosen that as their profession. They want to do it. It's a good thing, but she feels like her inability to do it herself is somehow a failure. And she feels guilty spending her money on hiring someone to come in and help her with this, because really I should be able to do it myself.
Yeah.
It was a very interesting conundrum she was in, because she was literally punishing herself. She was literally putting herself in a situation where she was always going to lose, because even if she hired someone to come in to clean her house and she felt that relief, that her house was clean and she didn't have to do it, she was now associating this guilt with it. So she couldn't actually enjoy the fact that he got what she wanted. And I think it's a really sad situation that a lot of people, especially working professionals, find themselves in, is that they work hard for the money. They work hard to earn what they earn, but they have a lot of guilt about spending that on anything that they don't consider a necessity. So that's I think what the conversation is.
I want to say, I don't know that it's all people. I think that it's
no,
mostly
not all people.
I think it's mostly women. I think it's mostly women or people who are socialized as women.
Okay.
Like, I don't know that guilt is something that, and I'm not sure. I can't speak to that for sure. In the past, Alex has exhibited that behavior as well. But like, now that we know that Alex is a woman, it makes perfect sense, right? That would be a thing.
Right.
It's like, oh yeah, okay, that makes sense. So
I feel like that totally connects.
That checks out.
Yeah.
But the other part you mentioned earlier on when you were talking about, so she couldn't afford, actually, she didn't say she couldn't afford. She emotionally didn't want to hire a house cleaner because she felt like she should be able to do this work, right? And so this guilt as a currency, right? Some of that comes from, I imagine, the fact that everybody's always so judgy, right? I remember one time, it's very funny that when you told me I was super judgy, you yourself were very judgy at the time. So I thought it was kind of ironic that you did that. But you're like, you're so judgy. And, but it hit me. It really, honestly, you really hurt me that time. You were right though. And you were right. And I was like, and I have really worked hard over the years to release that judgment, not just of it started with other people, but then I realized that I can never stop judging other people unless I stop judging myself. So then I had to do all that work to kind of figure out, that judgment. But, there's a lot of internalized judgment about this idea of the woman who has it all, right? The woman who can do everything, or if you choose
to do it all culture.
Well, but in some cases it's not right, because you're okay, you're a mother and you go back to work. You're a shitty mom for leaving your kid at home. Okay.
Yep.
So you're a mother, you stay home. Wow, you must have all this time on your hands. Oh my God, one of our friends, stay-at-home mom, homeschools her kids, and she had this neighbor who would always be oh, you're a stay-at-home mom, you have time, can you go run this errand for me? Can you go pick this up for me? Can you go, as if she didn't have anything. I'm just going to drop my kids off at your house today so that you can watch them because I have stuff I need to do. And she was like, what do you think I do at home all day? What exactly? And I feel so there's this element that exists within us that no matter what we choose, no matter what choices we make, we're going to feel guilty about it.
Yeah. But why? And it's interesting because I think some of it too, I was in this message board the other day and this woman was talking about how she feels like she's a terrible mother. And she kind of went on and on and on about how she's, constantly feeling like she's missing the mark and failing. And I said to her, I was like, I think over the years, the commitments and expectations of mothers, especially mothers, has gone up, right? The things that demand our time have expanded to include all sorts of other things, and the things that occupy our mind and stress us out. What are my kids doing on social media? What, how do I limit their screen time? Are they safe in school with all the things that are going on in schools these days, right? There's so many things that take up your emotional and spiritual space when you're a parent.
Yeah.
And so the expectations have only gone up, but our expectations of what we are capable of doing in that now reduced amount of time, both physical time and spiritual and emotional space, has not changed, right? We are still expecting ourselves to be the best stay-at-home mom, the best wife, the best housekeeper, the best cook, all of those things. And it's but if you think about it, if you look at some of our friends that stay home with their kids, that's a full-time job, right? It's not like staying home with your kids is some party and vacation, right? I mean, it's constant.
I feel each child is a full-time job. So if you have 3 kids, it's 3 full-time jobs, especially if they're disparate in ages, right? So you go toddler and somebody who's 10 and someone who's 16. And 16 is pretty independent. Let's say 15.
I mean, yeah. So, I think it just takes up a lot of emotional energy, a lot of spiritual energy, and a lot of physical energy and time in all those categories. And so I think that we have to learn that we have to change our expectations of ourselves. And I think that for me, one of the things I had to do was I had to say, I need to hire out a housekeeper. Because, Butch would constantly say to me, we don't, why do we need a housekeeper? I can do it. And I'm because there are other things that I would rather be spending my time on.
Yeah.
And this is not only going to make our quality of life better, but it's going to make somebody else's life better, right? This is going to help someone in our community. And so I'm not going to feel bad about it. I'm going to replace those feelings of guilt with enthusiasm. Instead of being like, oh my gosh, I'm going to spend this amount of money on my housekeeper again this week, I'm going to say, you know what? I can't wait for my house to be spotless Thursday afternoon, and how good it's going to feel. And I have really had to discipline myself that every time those feelings and thoughts would come in of guilt, where it was like, well, I could have spent that money on cleats for Butchie, or I could have spent that money on groceries, or, I could have made a different choice. I remind myself that I'm paying for peace of mind, and that is priceless. And I think that it's really important for anyone who's experiencing this relationship of associating indulgent, quote unquote, non-essential purchases with this guilt emotion, to really take a step back and ask themselves, what is your peace of mind worth? And it's not worthless, because if, the book that you gave me, Laziness Does Not Exist, which was so excellent. And I ironically read that in Jamaica on the beach, feeling guilty about being in Jamaica on the beach.
Well, that's why I told you to read it in Jamaica on the beach, so that maybe you wouldn't feel guilty on the beach in Jamaica.
Right. And I actually did find my guilt lessening, because it really reinforced, actually reinforced is the wrong word. It really educated me that those moments that we consider luxury moments, where we are napping or taking in a movie or going for a walk or resting or exercising, anything where we're not, quote unquote, being work productive, right? That we actually have incredible power in those moments to further our own self-development and deepen our understanding of our role in the world and be better at everything we do. And I have found that when I give myself the space to guilt-free indulge, I'm a better human being. I'm a better spouse. I'm a better person to myself. I'm better to my kids. And it's the unspoken lesson that I'm teaching my children, that self-prioritization is not, it's not indulgent, and it's not selfish, and there is no reason to feel guilty about it. They're actually important aspects of a fulfilling, robust life. And I think that that's something that sadly, it's been kind of drained out of us, because we live in this culture, especially with the internet and social media, of 24/7 productivity. And that is why I have a real problem with hustle culture. But anyway, that I think that's a whole other meeting.
I want to, it's another conversation. So I want to go back to I actually want to tell them the story, like just a little bit about you, because, I've noticed the difference, because obviously Saira and I are sisters. So over the years, who does she call when she has, when she's having that, I'm so guilty about whatever, either it's Farah or me.
I do not call the Ghostbusters, contrary to popular belief.
It's Ghostbusters. Hello, can I buy this thing? And what would happen was, you're like, I want to take this trip. I want to do this thing. Right. And there's like a few weeks of back and forth. And now this isn't how it happens now. This is how it used to happen. So what used to happen was, it would take months of like agony. And honestly, it was the same fucking conversation for like weeks of like, and here's the kicker. We are not talking about not being able to afford it. Like, the money is there. She can use it on this. But at the time, your belief in like guilt being, it was almost as if as long as you were feeling guilty, eventually it was okay for you to do it. So okay, so I'm going to sit and we're going to converse about this for months. And then finally, and at some point I started saying, Saira, why are we doing this? You're going to buy it anyway. Like, and I'm just going to have to listen to this bullshit.
I remember that.
I was like, Saira, why are we doing this? We're going to have this conversation for 3 months. You're going to decide to buy it. And then we're going to have a different conversation for 3 months between now and the time you go to Jamaica.
Like, let's just skip this part.
Why don't we just skip that shit?
Like, I remember you saying that. Let's just skip this part.
It's because you're going anyway. You're going to buy it. You're going to have a good time. Why do we need to do this portion of it? Right? Like, does it have to be? And I've noticed that it's not just with this. So this actually, the first time I ever noticed this was when a friend of ours was breaking up with her boyfriend, or God, this was like 15, 20 years ago, which was getting broken up. I can't remember. There was some breakup happening, and she was very upset, and he was a jerk. And she was so upset about losing him, and she was crying and about how she felt so bad that she felt bad about losing a guy who was a jerk. And I said, okay, so hold on. I was like, I get that you're upset about losing the guy who's a jerk. That's fine. He's a jerk. So now you feel foolish or silly or bad for feeling bad, even though, I was like, you're creating an environment in which you're just going to stack on feeling bad. Like, you don't have to feel bad about feeling bad. You can just allow yourself to and a lot of times we will try to stop ourselves from thinking about it, because it's like, I don't want to feel bad about this, so I'm going to distract myself. I'm going to do this other, as if that's like a bad thing. But you know what? That's an experience. Let yourself have the experience without mudding it up with the guilt that's unrelated to this. Like, if you're depressed about the fact that your boyfriend dumped you, then just have a miserable couple of weeks about mourning the loss of the boyfriend. There's no
like, why are we feeling bad about feeling bad?
Well, and I realized I do that too. Like, I did that for years, where I'd feel, and I told Alex this as well when she brought this up to me about feeling, and I said, why are you feeling bad about feeling bad? It's like, why are we adding, and again, I don't know that we're going to break any, like, we're going to come up with any psychological, like, this is exactly how you solve this problem. But I think that this is an element that we all grew up with because, think about it, right? Like, in almost everything, like the way that we were raised, the way to get you to not do something was to guilt you into it, right? So like, it's like, don't be, be more like your friend, she's so obedient, right? Or why didn't you get good grades like that person, or that kind of, whatever those messages are. And then you feel guilty for not doing that, for not living up to the expectation. And then you modify your behavior so that you will now not make that person feel bad, so they won't make you feel guilty, right?
Yeah.
So I feel like we somehow got programmed to where we felt like, okay, these things are all going to happen, but as long as I'm feeling guilty, it's okay. So like, it's like almost, and a lot of that is religion based, and I'm not dissing any religion, but religion has a lot of guilt in there, right? So, I feel like we're programmed into it, and then we just don't know how to not feel guilty. Like, I was addicted to feeling guilty or bad, or like I'd done something wrong. Like, it's now, what about you? Do you often find yourself like, because like now, just to be fair to you, Saira has done so much work over the years, right? And it's easier for me to reflect upon her work because I went through it, then I watched her go through it. And like now, like this trip to Jamaica that you're doing, it was like, it's much faster, right? So you'll bring it up, you're like, I feel so guilty. And I'm like, do you really? I'm like, is this? And then you're like, yes, right. And then all of the information will come to your brain. You're like, oh, fuck this. I'm just going to buy the trip, right? And then like, you get through it faster because now you understand the mechanism that your brain is going through, and you're trying to reprogram yourself. So I'm really proud of you for that. Like, that's hard. Like, this is some deep inside shit that you've been working on, dude.
Yeah, I mean, I think it was a really, really difficult habit to break because, we're looking for validation. And I think that, we're constantly seeking out the person who's going to give us, and it's interesting, we're looking for people to both validate our guilt, and we're then looking for the person to say, don't be dumb, and it's funny, Butch has a sweatshirt that says, don't be dumb, or don't do dumb things. And I think it's really interesting because, we all have the duality in us, right? Where, of course we're going to debate certain decisions, and, and that's healthy. It's healthy to say, okay, is this something I should, is it practical? Can I afford it? Like, I think there's a normal human process that we go through that's, fiscally responsible. But I think there is a point where reasonable, responsible behavior becomes pathological, and I think that that's really the point where you have to stop and say, okay, am I looking at this from an evaluation perspective where it's just, all right, let me look at the math and make sure it all makes sense. Okay, yep, this is good. Yep, I'm going to buy the ticket. Versus a pathological need to obsess over it, to give and almost in a way to say, this way, I'll never feel like if I go, I'm going to regret it, because if I put myself through all of this and I still went, then it must have been the right choice.
Yeah, that's really...
But I think that now I kind of have stopped doing that, because what I've realized now, having done it a couple of times, and like, because travel, like I said, is really important to me, I've seen the benefits in our family. I've seen the positive impact it's had on my children's mental and emotional health. I've seen the positive impact it's had on my marriage, because it's special time where my family gets to be together and experience something new, or even something we've done before. Like, we love going to Universal and Disney. And, some people are like, why do you keep going there? And it's like, because we as a family, it's something we all enjoy and we just love it, and if a time comes where my kids say to me, you know what, I kind of don't want to go, I'd be like, okay, great, let's do something else. But I think that was when I gave myself permission. And I think it actually happened the first trip we took to Disney. I kind of went all out, and we stayed on site, and we really just had a great time. And I said to myself, before I went on the trip, I said, no matter what happens, I'm going to say yes. And I am not going to worry about that trip. I'm going to just commit to the joy. And I have never felt so liberated in my life. I just felt so light on my feet. And I thought to myself, I've been living wrong 40 years of my life. I've been living wrong because I constantly had this weight on my chest of like a guilty conscience.
Yeah.
And guilty for nothing. And that's the thing, right? It's not even guilt for any like real thing. It was guilt for no reason other than it was habit to feel guilty to do something fun or guilty to take off work. And you know, it's funny. I remember one of my favorite bosses of all time, Randy Mason, he said one time I was going to take vacation or something. I can't remember what was going on. And he said to me, I said, well, you know, I'll be sure to check email and I'll do this and I'll do that because I was feeling guilty about leaving my colleagues and like all this other stuff. And he stopped me and he said, this is another interesting thing. He stopped me and he said, you know, Saira, you are allowed to just take time off. The world will continue to spin and work will keep happening. I'm not saying you're not a critical part of the mission, but we're going to be okay without you for a week.
Yeah.
And in that moment, what he was saying to me was check your ego. and it was funny because like, I never really stopped to think about that it's okay to, part of it, I think really is this ego. And it's not ego in a way of look how great I am. It's ego in the way of, I have to be important because if I'm not, I'm expendable.
Yeah. Right. Like, and then you go
know?
back to I could lose my job and then I won't be able to pay rent. And then, you know, that whole story that comes into.
And his point was, that's not true. You're telling yourself a story that isn't rooted in any reality, right? You can go and have a great time. And I want you to do that. I want you to turn off your email. I don't want you checking email. Go away. And his point wasn't, he didn't care for me as an employee. It wasn't that he didn't think I was productive and contributing. It was, you have to take time for yourself because if you don't, it's not healthy for you, right? And we're going to be fine because we need to be, because organizations have to have healthy, you know, coverage, all these other things that you're supposed to have in place so that people are allowed to have a life, you know? And I think that that's something that a lot of organizations don't do. And something I really appreciated that he did do is that he never once made anyone feel like you're not allowed to take time off because what am I going to do? He was always like, when are you taking time off? Because you need to do that to be a good employee and be good to yourself. And I think that's a really important thing for people to realize that if you're working in an organization that doesn't prioritize that, that's probably
not prioritizing you.
Guilt. Right. That's probably another thing that quietly is kind of festering in there and creating this behavior in you of, and even if you don't work at a place anymore that does that, it takes a long time for that to kind of.
It's conditioned within you because like all of these things build on top of each other, like our childhood ideas and our belief systems. And then you watch on TV and, you know, and you said something earlier about the productivity, right? We're like, we have come into a space, and that's, I really want to recommend that people read Laziness Does Not Exist. It's a fabulous book. It's sitting back there. I'd get up and get it if it wasn't going to be too disruptive for me, but I will post the link for it. That, because we are, and there's actually another very interesting class, Saira, I took. I think you'd find this class fascinating, by Toy Smith. Okay, so Toy Smith has a course called Decolonizing Business, or Business Beyond Profit. And it's about how our current work infrastructure came to be. And when you look at how it actually was built, it was built off of the same infrastructure as slavery. So it's fascinating. The plantation infrastructure has been implanted into this world now. And it's not very old. I thought it was like, it has to be older. And I, like, the first time I heard her say that, I was like, there's no way. Like, this has been like, this has been like, so I went, and it hasn't, like, the industrialization of human beings was what started all of this. And then the industrialization of obviously mechanics and all that happened, the revolution, blah, 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 the industrial revolution happened. And we just took that methodology. And so now think about it. We're now here in the 20. And so you would absolutely love that course. Like, fab. And then I'll send you the link. But now here we are. Okay. And we think it's always been this way. This is how it's always been. And it's not how it's always been. It's been this way for a couple hundred years. And if you think about the work environment that we live in, right? Say the 1950s is when we started to have like this office, and you go in and you come out, and then you have your, you know, like all of this infrastructure got set in place. And then you talked about the internet and social media and all of these other, now technology has made it so that the messages we get, we're bombarded by 30,000 messages a day, just right? The amount of work that you can do, right, in a day is now, you personally, physically, in order to remain healthy, will want to devote X amount of time to work. And it's going to depend on you, your framework, your life, how you view things. There's so many things that contribute to that. But
Yep.
the society's philosophy is that if you aren't being productive, if you're not making money, then you're a failure, right? So then that idea and that message, it permeates through everything, right? So like, let's talk about your vacation. You're going on vacation. What a lazy fuck you are, right?
Yep.
You're not working. First, you're a lazy
Yep.
fuck. Second, you're wasting all this money. How much money did you spend on the vacation? Whatever you spent on that, you could have put it in retirement. You could have,
Yep.
there's so many other things you could have done with it. God, you are irresponsible, right? So there's these messages that are pre-programmed in us from a lifetime, and we don't even notice that it's happening, right? And I think that like we reached a point right before COVID where it was like we're all running, and then we hit the wall that is COVID, like the giant brick wall that is COVID. We hit it, and we all are like dazed a little bit, like what the fuck just happened, right? But now what's happening is I think people are starting to recognize those 2 years away helped people to see what is really important to them. Like you discovered that the travel was important to you. So now we have people who are trying to make decisions for themselves that are about their life, happiness, fulfillment, and joy. Because like you said, that's my jam. My jam is how do we make choices that allow us to experience the full joy of our life, right? As opposed to here's a little joy, but here's a lot of guilt. All joy comes with a side of guilt, you know?
Exactly.
How do we
with a side of guilt?
Yeah, it's like, here, oh, you want some guilt? Oh my God, that reminds me of the I'd like a supersize of death with a Coke.
Yeah, I love a supersize of death with a Coke.
That, and honestly, that's exactly what that song is about. I'm gonna put that link in so that people can hear it. It's a great song. But so now we bring all of this here, and I don't know that we say, okay, so we've decided that we're making the decisions to make us happier and more fulfilled, but then we don't understand why we're feeling so bad about it, right? So like, I'm taking those choices. Shouldn't I be feeling better now, right? And I think that that's the underlying thing that needs to be addressed for all of us, right? Is, okay, why are you feeling that bad? Because like, I know for us, it's trauma. You know, we grew up in Pakistan. Sometimes we had lots of money, and then other times our electricity was being shut off, and, you know, we were almost evicted. Oh my God. In fucking, when was it? It was like when we moved to the States early on. Saira and I had no concept of money. We were not taught about money growing up. And so we came to the States, and we maxed out like every credit card we got in the first like 3 weeks you were there. We just get in and we were Filene's.
Like, wait a minute, that's not free money. What do you mean?
Like, I know, right? We were both like, this is free money. It's no problem. Well, I mean, because that's how Dad treated credit cards. It's like free money.
And it's funny because I even remember we were at it was in Heinz Convention Center, and I got an MBNA credit card.
I remember that. I remember the exact card you're talking about.
But funny story, I still have that credit card. It's now a Bank of America credit card, and it's the longest credit history I have. So it makes my credit pretty awesome because I have this like since 1998.
Oh my God, I have one from Bank of America too.
But
mine started at Bank Boston. That's how mine started.
Yeah. Oh, it's so funny.
Absolutely. And but I remember us getting to a point where, so Saira and I made a lot of really poor choices. We did a lot of, we spent a lot of money. We really dug a hole for ourselves. Like, it was great. Not at all. And then we got to the point where we had to borrow money from our aunt, which to both of us was like, it was the thing that we never wanted to do. It's like the thing that it's like, that is the thing, that is the line. When you cross that line, it's just, I can't even tell you how I felt. I felt like the biggest fucking failure in the world.
But I think that's you bring up a good point, right? Is that I am not Saira from 1998. You know, I am Saira from 2023. You know,
exactly.
And I'm not 18. I'm 42.
And you understand how money works now.
Right. And you know, so, and I think that's another thing is that, you know, these really, really old traumatic experiences that you're really, all of us are still, you know, what is it? Your inner child, right? It's still we're all still doing this inner child work. But I think that when you're young, you have no concept. That's exactly what you're saying. You have no concept of money, right? You want a dolly, right? You just want the dolly. You know, you don't care how much the doll costs. You just want it. And then you get the doll and you're really excited and you play with it for 5 minutes and you're bored of it. And, you know, then you're done with it and off it goes. Are you
thinking of the orange hair dolly right now?
I know that I have a picture of that doll. I really wanted that doll. And it would cost like
I remember.
It wasn't even that expensive. I know. I really wanted that doll. But, you know, I think that the thing is that when you're kids, you don't care, right? There is no guilt at first. You're like, oh, I get the doll and I played with it and it served its purpose and it brought me joy in those moments and I'm done with it. And maybe I'll come back to it. Maybe I won't. But then your mom or your dad says to you, I spent really good money on that doll. And I will tell you, I have caught myself doing this to my own children. I spent $20 on that doll and you haven't even played with it. Why did I even bother buying it? Yeah, blah, 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 blah. And you go on this whole thing. And then that's where it begins, right? There's that guilt that now says you did not enjoy it enough.
Oh, so good. Yes.
And therefore you didn't deserve it. I shouldn't have wasted my money on buying you this doll. I regret my decision to spend my money on investing in those moments of joy you had. I won't do it next time. And now
wow, that's a lot of shit, by the way, that you just dropped on. Like, that's a serious, when you rewind and listen again, guys, that's some serious shit right there.
Right, but when we unpack it and we really say, what are we saying in that moment where we say to the kid, I spent $20 on that doll and you never play with it.
Yeah.
That's what we're saying. That's when you unpack it. That's really what it comes down to. We're saying it wasn't worth the money. I shouldn't have done it. I regret buying it for you because you didn't enjoy it enough. You didn't deserve it. That's a lot, right? And even though you didn't come out and say those words, you can see how a kid might start to feel that way. And, it's funny because like Eliza even one day said to me, she's like, oh, Mom, I'm really sorry that I had you buy that doll for me. Like, I didn't play with it as much as I should have. And like, I'm feeling really guilty about it. And she actually, I was so impressed with her because she actually came to me and she said, Mom, why do I feel guilty every time I spend money? And she's 12.
She's so young.
I know. And she's 12. And I had to have this conversation with her and I had to tell her, be like, Eliza, if you have made a decision that you want something and it's something that you think is going to make you happy and you've given it some thought because, you have limited money that you got for Christmas or whatever, and you've given it some thought and you've decided that this is what you want to spend your money on, don't feel bad about it. Go ahead and spend your money on that and enjoy it. And when you're done with it, you can donate it to some other child who couldn't buy it and you're going to make them happy. That doesn't mean that the money you spent wasn't worth spending because you got to experience it. You enjoyed it. Look, vacations end. We don't go on vacation and sit on vacation forever. When I'm on the boat out in Jamaica and I dive into the water and I swim with the turtles, that's not forever. That's just that moment. And yes, that moment's going to end, but that doesn't mean that it wasn't worth it. And I think that we're expecting too much of the moments, which by the way, we're cramming too much into. That was one of the things I was saying to you about this year is I said, I'm going to stop multitasking because I think the more we live in this society that has taught us that we should multitask, right? Fill every single moment of your time with productivity.
Right. And double productivity if you can.
You're lazy, right? Double productivity, which of course we all know it doesn't exist. But then we wonder why we're so tired, right? We wonder why we're constantly, I don't have time to go to the gym. I'm too busy working. And it's like, guess what? You're not going to be working for much longer if you don't take care of your body because, that kind of is what does everything. So, your mind does everything, your body, and science has already shown that exercise and physical fitness and wellness is a critical part of productivity, right? So if we don't make time for that stuff, guess what? Eventually that productivity is going to be nothing. So I
also think productivity is a problem, right? Because most people equate time with productivity, right? So like, I know people who can get 3 days of work done in 5 hours. And I know people who can take 5 hours of work and turn it into 3 days of work, right? So I think it's like, if you take two people and they're both different, like, so now this person who can get 3 days of work done in 5 hours, does that mean they still need to work those 3 days? Right. So like there is that element as well. I don't think it's I think it's productivity equals time, right? Exactly. Value equals time working.
Yeah. And I think that, and they actually was reading an article the other day and I wish I had bookmarked it because they said something that it's actually a known phenomenon called productivity punishment. And it's basically about how the 20% of your workforce that does 80% of your work is actually punished for their productivity because they're more and more and more is constantly expected of them, but their compensation doesn't go up. Their time off doesn't go up. There's no perks, right?
There's no perks for being hyper productive.
There aren't any. In fact, you get penalized for it. And the people that aren't doing the productive work continue to have the same, actually better, because they get to kind of, meander through and maybe get a quarter of the work done that you get done in the same amount of time, but you're still both making the same amount of money. Yeah. And I think that it's really important to think that if you have productive people, number one, we should be encouraging folks to really value their private time. We need to do that, and it's not weakness to be unproductive. It's not, it's self-care, and it's an important part of longevity is to protect your time. And that's one of the things I was saying to this woman in this message group when we were talking about how she was thinking, how she had to do all the things all the time. And it was like, you need to be very protective of your time with your family, time with yourself, that is time that should not be negotiable. It should not be, oh, well, I have 45 minutes on my calendar that I set aside for taking a walk, but that's okay. Somebody wants to have a meeting with me, I'm going to schedule it.
Yeah.
Like barring that 45-minute meeting being, the best meeting of your life that's going to propel you to,
It'll cure cancer.
Right. Unless it's some serious like win for you, that time should not be negotiable. And I think that because of the guilt culture that we live in, it literally seasons everything in our life, from the food that we eat to the desserts that we allow ourselves to have, to going out to eat with our husband or spouse or wife or whatever, to taking downtime, going on vacation, spending time with our kids. Even the things that we're doing that are good, we feel guilty about. I went to the gym today. Oh, but I feel so guilty that I wasn't productive during that hour working. Oh, next time I'm going to take my phone with me. I'm going to work when I'm on the treadmill. What? And so I think that we've literally taken this guilt and we've attached it to everything. It's not just indulgent things now that I think about it. I think it goes with everything. Like I think
it does. I want to actually throw in there, because you said a few things that I want to touch on. So one of the things that you said, and I was like, oh, I didn't think about this. I didn't think about bringing it into this conversation because it never occurred to me. Okay. So as we're talking, I'm thinking about people who are low income.
Yep.
Okay. So like the things that we're talking about, because we keep talking about vacations and house cleaners and all that. And it's important to recognize that if you are low income and this is not your quote unquote indulgence, everybody has their indulgence. For you, if you're lower income, then for you, it might be your streaming service, it'll depend on what your particular framework is. But the key thing that I think is important is we all feel like we are lucky to have a job. Like, how often have you heard that in your life that so-and-so doesn't have a job? You're lucky to be working. And the way that the entire infrastructure is set up for employees is that I go in for, just think about the language, right? I go in for a job, right? I am being interviewed for a job. Makes perfect sense, right? We always go into that interview thinking that we're begging for that job, that we really want to be picked. Please pick me, like,
like
and
dodgeball.
like it's a favor that we are being hired, right? And then we feel grateful to just be working. Oh, thank God. And especially if you're somebody who has been unemployed or almost been evicted or been evicted or dealt with all of those issues, right? So these things, right? Now you have a job, you're like, oh, thank God. Now at least, and that's where for Saira and I, that's where the homeless things comes from. So like when we were in the late 90s, when we did not actually get evicted because we borrowed the money, we each took on 3 jobs. So first she took on 3 jobs, then
and mind you, this was a mouse infested apartment.
Oh my God, it was gross. Like that, there were literally
a bathtub that would drain. I mean, it was horrible.
Oh, it was so gross. There were roaches everywhere. Like it was disgusting. But we couldn't afford anything.
Well, we could afford. Yeah.
So we basically just stayed there because it was rent controlled. So we were really lucky that it was rent controlled. And so back when rent control was a real thing in Boston. We had 3 jobs each. And because we finally understood what a blessing it is to be able to make money and pay bill. Oh my God. Okay. So now, but we went and took it to the complete opposite direction. So now anytime I go in, and this is not the case now anymore, but for many years, jobs for me were like, I'm begging you for a job. I'm lucky to have one. So I'll take whatever salary you'll give me. I'll take what I can get. If I take time off, am I like being ungrateful for the job that I have? That's why I need to make sure that I prove my value to you, because otherwise you're going to fire me and replace me with someone else. Right. So we think of ourselves always as the people in deficits, in supplicating. And so when you feel that that's the position that you're coming from, there is only one way to feel when you take time off, and that's guilty. There is only one way to feel when you finish your work in 5 hours and like, you're like, well, okay, I've done everything, but oh my God, like I need to get more because otherwise I'm going to get fired. Right. And so you live in this fear of constantly saying something that's going to fuck up your ability to make money. And then and what we don't realize is that, and this is the magic part, right? And we know this from having been on the employer side, is that honestly, it's so much worse for the employer when we don't have somebody, right? We are desperately looking for that right fit. We want someone to come in and work out like we are. And I think that is like what I'm hoping for the podcast in general, as we keep making more episodes, is to give these new ideas, these new ways of looking at things that maybe collectively we can start to make changes that will then create systemic changes above. Because as you said, if you're working for someone that doesn't, like when you were talking about Randy, and you were saying how he wanted you to take a vacation, and that you said something about I can't remember exactly what you said, but he showed you that he cared about you. Oh,
Yep.
you said it's not that I didn't matter to him. It's not that he didn't care, right? It's exactly the opposite. He cared
It is.
so much that he could see that if you didn't do these things, and this is what a really good leader and a good manager will do, they will be able to tell. They know what it takes to be a good employee. They know what it takes to produce, and they know how important these vacation and self-care time and these kinds of things are. And they will show their care for you by insisting that you do these things for yourself, because they recognize that if they don't, then 8 months down the line, you're going to be the burned out person who leaves because you can't deal with it anymore because you're the high performer. So I think that's something that's really important to recognize, is that a lot of these, like the guilty feelings that we have, this is not meant to say you suck. These guilty feelings come from a very real place of an infrastructural oppression upon us, right? And it's nobody's fault. This is just sort of how the world has happened. But like, we can acknowledge it, become aware, because like all you really did was become aware of it and then make a decision, right? You were like, I'm deciding that this is not how I want to be. And then you had to figure out how to make it work for you. Like, and I mean, I imagine that took some time to figure out what your mechanism was going to be.
Yeah, and I think that after mom died, I think that was such a huge eye-opening experience years later. Like obviously it had the initial whatever, but I think it's grief is a lifetime relationship. Grief is a relationship. And I think that what happened to me is, I kind of went through the initial phases, but then there was, after I had my own children, that there's a whole other experience of being motherless, and how the things that you want to ask them about, and you kind of feel their loss all over again, but in a different way. And I think what I really learned over the last couple of years, even though she's been gone 17 years, I think what I really started to think about is what is the point, right? Like if we're getting existential, right? What is the point? And I really had to stop myself and say, the point isn't, how many days of school my kids missed because we went to Disney. The point is we went. And that when I'm gone from the earth, which eventually I will be, as we all have an expiration date, what are my kids going to remember? Are they going to remember that I was the, stickler for the rules, and, you can't miss a single day of school, I don't care how sick you are or if they want to take vacation? Or are they going to remember all the times that we took trips together and what happened on those trips? Are they going to remember the conversations that we had just walking down Main Street in Magic Kingdom, or snorkeling with turtles in the Bahamas? And what is that going to teach them about their value, as inherent value as human beings when they're adults, right? And what is my legacy for those kids? And I think that was really huge for me, because mom only got 52 years on the planet. That's not a lot. I mean,
I'm counting it down. I'm very close. I'm 7 years away.
I go, I'm a decade away. I'm 10 years away. If I died the same time my mom did, that's it. I got 10 years left on earth, right? In 10 years, I will be as old as she was when she got told your time's up.
Yeah.
And I don't want my life to be a series of guilt-ridden decisions where I never got to fully be in the moment of anything, because I constantly attached this fakeness, right? This that doesn't, I'm doing it to myself. Yeah. And I don't think you can make a different choice. And I think that what you said is so true, is that it is a choice. Everything we do every single day, it's a choice. And I had to choose something different. And I think the one piece of advice I would give anybody that's struggling with this, right, that's struggling with this notion of guilt, is I would really force yourself to look at the facts and ask yourself, if is there really a reason to feel guilty?
You're giving them my advice.
Exactly. Ask yourself to show me the proof. Where's the evidence? And I think when you really stop and think about it, if you have any real evidence, then don't do it. Right? If there's some real reason, right, that by doing this, there's a reason to feel guilty for real, right? Like it's going to
hurt. Like, for example, $300 to pay your medical bills, and you're like, I'm going to spend $300 on a diamond ring from Tiffany. I don't think they sell those for Tiffany, but let's just say that's it, right?
Sure, whatever, yeah.
Okay, now you didn't pay your medical bill. That bill's still going to come due. So, okay, I can totally see feeling guilty about that.
And guilt is only useful insofar as it produces a positive outcome, something that's going to give you a benefit. Otherwise, it's a waste of time and energy, and it's the thief of your joy. And if we're not going to have joy, what are we here for? you know? And I'm not suggesting that we all live, irresponsibly, but I do think it's important to understand that you're allowed to have more joy than you are guilt. You should expect your life to be filled with more joy than guilt.
We don't use the word should here.
Oh, that's right. Stop shooting all of yourself. Let me rephrase, because that was obviously not the right.
Clearly, my sister has not heard of the name of my podcast.
You deserve to have more joy than guilt.
Yes.
And you owe it to yourself to see the value you have inherently as a human being and not see those decisions, whatever they may be, whatever your income level, whatever those things may be. Everybody has that process that they go through, right? You owe it to yourself to have joy and happiness without the guilt. And I think the best way to do that is to ask is, show me the proof, right? And if there is no real reason that, the guilt doesn't need to be there, you should absolve yourself and go and take that trip or keep that streaming service, and again, not to be fiscally irresponsible, but that if you've done that work and made the decision that it is affordable, that's when you have to say, it's not an indulgent to care about my needs. It's not indulgent or selfish to take time off. It's a necessity so that I can fully be present in my life and have more joy than I do pain. And I just don't understand why. I think, we're nearing the end, obviously, so I don't want to start a whole other topic, but
as she starts a whole other topic.
Yeah. But I do think it's a really important thing for humanity. And I know that's obviously like a very big,
she just went full. Like, all right, I'm going to talk about humanity now.
It's so important for individuals to recognize their inherent value.
Yes.
And that they are deserving of love and joy and happiness and peace. And they have the freedom to make different choices. They don't have to do what they've always been doing just because they've been doing it.
That's the biggest lesson, is you don't have to do what you've been doing all along just because that's what you've been doing. Like, that's for so many years, like, this is how I've always done it. It's like, okay, well, that doesn't mean anything. You can make a change if you want to. I want to actually add something to that as we wrap up. So the thing I want to add as we wrap up is this: if you are working for yourself and you're a business owner, then you are going to be the oppressor as well as the person being oppressed in terms of your time, your belief, your vacations, things like that. So I cannot stress enough how important it is to be mindful about what kind of boss you're being to yourself. And I've
said that so many times. Don't be your own worst employee, worst boss.
Worst
boss.
Exactly. And then the other thing that I want to say is that if you're someone who's in a company, or now this is my jam, this is my life mission, this is the direction I'm going in, is that if you are somebody who has a manager, you're a manager, you're a supervisor, you're a leader, you have the ability to either reinforce this guilt feeling in your employees and people who report to you, or you have the ability to change the narrative that they're telling themselves by leading by example and by sharing these ideas and these thoughts with them. What I want to recommend is to start with this. Start with this book, because this is actually, there's two books in here. So the first book I want to recommend is Laziness Does Not Exist by Devin Price, Dr. Devin Price. This is literally the most brilliant book I've ever read. I think it is a must read for everyone in the we're in the 21st or 22nd, wherever the hell we are, whatever century we're in. It's a must read. They also wrote a book, Unmasking Autism, which is how I figured out I was autistic. So this is really important. And then the other book is by Ruchika Tulshyan, which is one of my new favorite books, is called Inclusion on Purpose. And it's about creating a culture of belonging at work. But the part of it that is really critical, the part that is relevant to this particular conversation, is leading with empathy. Is how do you lead with empathy? And it's a really great revisiting of being a manager and a leader. So even though it is specifically about creating a culture of belonging in an intersectional world, the message below is universal. It's not, and that's what I love about this book, is that it is about one thing, but it's also about a couple of other things. Guys, having Saira here was absolutely amazing. Sis, did you have anything you wanted to finish with?
I think I'm good.
She's good. All right, she's good. Thank you guys so much for joining me today. I will be back next week with another new episode of Stop Shitting All Over Yourself. Have a wonderful, wonderful day. Oh, This episode is great. I know you love this episode. Leave a review for us. My podcast manager is going to be so excited that I said this. Leave a review for us wherever you listen to this. Tell everyone how much you enjoyed it, how it helped you, how you now feel no guilt, or how you now are going to embark on the journey to not feel any guilt. Your reviews help this podcast get in the feed of the people who need it the most. So please, please, please do share your review. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.